Okay, this is the cardiovascular system lesson 1, looking at the heart. By the end of the lesson, hopefully you will be able to identify the structure of the heart and look at what each one does, and hopefully you'll be able to describe the cardiac conduction system, looking at how the heart actually beats. Okay, the structure of the heart first of all. As you notice, there are two sides of the heart. The left hand side of the heart is red, representing oxygenated blood, and the right hand side of the heart is blue, representing deoxygenated blood. So let's have a look at the left hand side of the heart first of all. So the pulmonary vein takes blood from the lungs, and the lungs have oxygenated the blood. So the pulmonary vein carries oxygenated blood from the lungs back to the heart, and then it fills up into the left atrium. When the left atrium is full and the heart beats, it contracts, forcing the blood through the bicuspid valve and into the left ventricle. When the blood enters the left ventricle, the bicuspid valve slams shut to prevent any backflow. Now, as you notice, the left ventricle has a thicker muscular wall than the other chambers, and this is to provide more force to push the blood out around the body, whereas the other ventricle, the right ventricle, isn't as thick because it's only going back to the lungs. So the left ventricle pushes the blood out through the top semilunar valve and into the aorta, which is the biggest artery from the heart, which takes the blood all the way around the body. Dividing the two sides of the heart, we've got the septum, which is a muscular wall which stops the blood mixing from left and right side. Going over to the deoxygenated side, the vena cava brings the deoxygenated blood that has been used up by the body and brings it back to the heart. The blood then fills up the right atrium, and when it is full and when the heart contracts, it forces the blood through the tricuspid valve and into the right ventricle. When the blood enters the right ventricle, the tricuspid valve slams shut to prevent backflow into the atrium. The deoxygenated blood is then pushed out by the right ventricle as it contracts with force, and it goes through the semilunar valve and into the pulmonary artery. And from there, the deoxygenated blood goes back to the lungs to be oxygenated again. And as I have mentioned, the two valves at the top are called semilunar valves, and these prevent backflow from the aorta and from the pulmonary artery back into the left and right ventricle. So they're the structure of the heart, and you need to be able to identify these to describe how it works. If we look at the brief functions now, the left and right atria push blood into the ventricles. The left and right ventricles contract with more force than the atria to push the blood out of the heart, into the aorta around the body, and into the pulmonary artery back to the lungs. The vena cava brings deoxygenated blood back to the right atrium. The pulmonary vein brings oxygenated blood to the left atrium from the lungs. The pulmonary artery takes deoxygenated blood back to the lungs. The aorta, the biggest artery in the body, takes oxygenated blood around to the body tissues. Tricuspid valve and the bicuspid valve, they both open to allow blood to flow into the ventricles and slam shut again to prevent any backflow. And the semilunar valves do the same job in that they open to allow blood to go through but slam shut to prevent backflow, but this time into the ventricles. Okay, so let's have a look at the cardiac system. The cardiac conduction system describes how the heart actually beats. Now, the heart is unique in the fact that it's myogenic, and this means it generates its own electrical impulse. Imagine electrical wire in your house, then the wiring is exactly the same within the heart. Now, the difference with the heart is that it can generate its own impulse. It's the only muscle in the body that can do that, and the impulse starts at the heart's pacemaker, known as the sinoatrial node, or SA node. The SA node decides how fast the heart beats, and it spreads the impulse from the SA node across the atria. Now, as it does this, this is called atrial systole, and this forces the blood out of the atria. The electrical impulse then passes to the atrioventricular node, known as the AV node. This delays the impulse to allow the atria to fully contract before passing it on down through what's called the bundle of His. The bundle of His is located in the septum, and it eventually branches out into two bundles. Finally, as the electrical impulse passes down the bundle of His, it branches off to the left and to the right, and eventually to the Purkinje fibers. The Purkinje fibers, when they are stimulated, they cause the ventricles to contract with great force, and then the left ventricle will pump blood out around the body through the aorta, and the right ventricle will pump blood out via the pulmonary artery back to the lungs. And just to remind you again, the ventricles contract with the greatest force because they've got to push the blood furthest. And we call this ventricular systole. Okay, so we've identified the structures of the heart and look at what they do, and we've also described how the heart beats via the cardiac conduction system.